Howdy folks, and welcome back to the channel. Now in this video I wanted to give you guys a bit of an update on the stuff we've been working on that will ultimately become the MMORPG Overhaul that we're creating for Project Zomboid with the help of an incredible team of modders, writers, and server gurus. Now, if you haven't seen the couple of videos I've done on this so far and you're not too familiar with what this project entails, I'll leave a link to the other videos in the description so you can catch up if you'd like to. Otherwise, consider dropping the video a like and subscribe to the channel for more zombie survival stuff just like this. Alright, with the intro out of the way, let's jump right into one of the biggest features we've actually been able to accomplish and get working recently. I'm super excited to talk about this because it was something that we didn't actually know would be possible when we first jumped into making this modding overhaul, but thanks to the efforts of PZ modder Monkey, we've been able to get fully functional dungeons in Project Zomboid. Now, to clarify, this is group content accessed via an entrance portal or gateway that is otherwise closed off from the outside world. You cannot access it via any other part of the map other than that entrance, and it's specifically built to be a challenge. Now, we already had two maps that had been built to work as these dungeon areas we wanted to make possible. If you watched my last video on this, you would have seen that these are known as the Lab, which is an underground complex underneath the secret military base found to the west of Rosewood out in the forest. You can access the Lab via the elevator at the back left corner of said military base, creating the illusion that the map is underground. Our second dungeon was a dugout cave system built by a paranoid bunker prepper at the edge of the Louisville exclusion zone. This became a temporary home to a bunch of different survivors throughout and after the outbreak. Previously, entering these dungeon areas simply required you to step onto the right part of the existing map. Now, we have a fully functional entrance system that's a bit more polished and gives the player some important feedback. A red circle on the ground now marks a dungeon entrance, easily spotted when nearby thanks to the guiding red arrow that will help you towards the entrance when you are in close proximity. Stepping into the circle will open up a prompt asking if you wish to enter the dungeon. The same happens once inside when you step onto the red circle signifying the exit. It's a small change, but one that should mean that players don't enter by accident and can choose to enter rather than just being teleported right away. So in my previous video we talked about how currently there's no instancing in Project Zomboid, meaning that the existing map and all other modded maps that attach to the vanilla one are all accessible only once. Here's the game changer that the dungeon mod brings to the table. In the sandbox options, a server admin is able to decide how many of the dungeon maps are present on the server. It will then create that specific number of versions of that dungeon, all disconnected from one another, so there's no way to access them outside of that singular dungeon entrance we just talked about. We can then set a timer that will decide how often a dungeon cycles to a new one of those instances. To explain this a little bit better, let's assume that I walk up to the dungeon and enter it at 12 PM. I complete the dungeon and leave at 12:30 PM. Now I've decided that in the sandbox options, dungeons will reset every hour. That means the dungeon I've just cleared will be present until 1 PM for all other players. Once 1 PM passes, the dungeon system will allocate a new uncleared version of the dungeon map and link it to the entrance. If I enter the dungeon again at 1:30 PM, I will be in a new fresh dungeon. The timers can all be customized and a player won't be forced out of an instance they are currently in, which means they can stay for as long as they like and a fresh dungeon will still be presented to anyone else that would like to enter one from the outside. Now, obviously I can see there being potential issues with larger maps being used in this way. For example, you wouldn't want to create 10 instances of a sprawling city like Raven Creek, but for smaller challenge-based maps like the ones we're using for the dungeon system, this works a treat. So we've got a pool of available dungeons that will give players a new instance on time intervals with a customizable amount of these instances available, but those instances have to run out at some point, right? Well, this is where the non-plug and play aspect comes in. Unfortunately, Project Zomboid itself doesn't necessarily support instancing, and as much as I'd love to be able to just offer this in a simple mod download that just works without any further messing around when you click subscribe on the workshop page, that just isn't possible. possible currently. To explain it in the briefest way possible, there's essentially a map folder in the files for any server that has your custom maps. By running a custom script, we're able to delete the map folder specific to these dungeon maps when the server restarts. Any other modded maps are unaffected, but our dungeons are deleted. The server then reconstructs these files on a restart, seeing that they are missing and they're needed. This generates our pool of dungeons again from scratch, now resetting the dungeons as if we just started the server. As long as your server restarts regularly, for us it's once a day, then the dungeons can keep on coming. Again, I do just want to stress that this isn't a plug and play experience that just anyone will be able to download and get working. It's fair to say you need at least a little bit of knowledge when it comes to running servers. This is the easiest we can make this process within the limitations of Project Zomboid, and Monkey has been kind enough to draw up a written guide on his mod page for this process if you're interested in running the Dungeons mod and scripting it for your own servers. He's made the mod publicly available for you guys to have a mess around with. He's also kindly offered to help people with their own dungeons and set everything up for you for fair compensation if you'd rather not do it yourself. Now, I'll leave a link to the mod page in the description of this video so that you can take a look if you're interested. So yeah, fully functional and instance dungeons in Project Zomboid. This is going to be a huge part of our MMORPG overhaul we're completing, but I do also hope that it's going to bring something new to the Project Zomboid community as a whole and give you guys something that I know a lot of people have been after. Who knows, fingers crossed later down the line the developers will consider supporting instancing on an official basis, but until then, I hope you guys find this mod as cool as I do. As a very final note for this section, Monkey and Soulfilter have started some testing together for compatibility between the dungeons and the quest system that Soulfilter is building for our project. This should mean that we're able to link questing directly to dungeons and ensure that items can be acquired for said quests within the dungeons themselves. Alright, so time to move on from the dungeons for a bit and show you guys some of the other stuff we've been working on. As I mentioned once or twice before, crafting is a huge part of both RPGs and MMOs. For that reason, I wanted to expand on the crafting that's possible inside Project Zomboid and put an emphasis on making functional, wearable, or equipable items. I've already shown off items from makeshift weapons and makeshift clothing mods that we commissioned Yaki to make for our project, and whilst these are already pretty damn cool, we've implemented the next step towards the end goal by bringing in a tiered armor system, complete with different resources for crafting them, different stats, and a different look to show that you've stepped up to the next level of gear. Hopefully, as we go forward, we'll be able to find a way to add some more RPG-esque stats and bonuses to the armor, but it's still early days in regards to that specifically. To craft all these new pieces of armor, it makes sense to have some additional materials required to craft them. With that in mind, popular modder Chuck has been working with us on some ways to get those materials. He's created new skills for the game that will come under what we're calling the secondary skills. These will be available to all players as opposed to the primary skills focused on an output product like weaponsmithing or armor smithing that will be limited to 2 per player. So far, Chuck has added mining, logging, and skinning skills. Skinning works exactly the same as butchering an animal does right now. The only difference is that you'll get some extra resources for your trouble, and leveling your skinning skill, which in turn will gradually increase the rate at which you successfully harvest these additional rarer items like animal bones or leather scraps. Logging, as you'd expect, is very similar. Chopping down trees has a chance to drop tree sap or bark, again increasing as you level your skill. Interestingly, in theory, we'd actually be able to tie different items to different types of trees as well, since Project Zomboid does actually distinguish between, let's say, a birch tree or oak trees, but we'll see about that a bit later. Finally, we come to the mining skill, which is by far the most impressive of the 3. Formerly, we were working with Hunter JP, who originally made the mining mod for Project Zomboid. Now, unfortunately, Hunter has had to take a step back from modding, but was kind enough to let us use this system as a foundation for Chuck to experiment with. Now, as a reminder, these mining nodes were formerly placed manually by admins and would be permanently in the world once placed. Now, under Chuck's new system, entire mining zones zones can be placed at once with certain randomized elements attached. Server owners will be able to decide which ores spawn in which zones, how many of those ores can spawn in that zone before it reaches the maximum, and how often they'll spawn too. All of this is customizable by the individual zones, so they can all be different if you want them to be. With Chuck's new mods, we're able to build out the resources needed by the tiered armor and weapon crafting systems and give players new milestones to achieve along their survival journey that should prove to give them that nice little hit of dopamine when finding a new mining area with that ore that you've been after as the final piece of the puzzle for a high tier weapon or piece of armor. We've also added some tools that will be needed for the higher tier crafts, which these resources will again be needed for. Each of these unique tools will be presented in a quest line associated to the skill when the player hits the required level. For example, a player hitting level 2 in weaponsmithing may find a new quest is available at the weaponsmith back at a settlement to acquire some forging gloves for dealing with liquid hot metals. Once the quest is complete, this will allow crafting of the next tier of armor. We're hopeful that all of these systems brought together will essentially mean that the crafting feels more meaningful in Project Zomboid with the overhaul that we're presenting, giving players more reason to interact with one another for trading of key skills, whilst linking progress in said skills to both a story-driven narrative and other accomplishable goals like finding necessary resources. Now that's it from me in this one, but I do just want to take a moment to let you guys know that we're actually testing some of the mods that I've spoken about in this video on our Patreon server at the moment as part of our Dark Ages themed wipe for the month. This focuses around players picking one of 4 ransacked settlements and renovating them as a group with the help of things like the tiered crafted armor and weapons that I've spoken about today. And with that comes the new gathering skills too. So if you're interested in testing a couple of these mods before anyone else and want to support what we're doing with mod development, there's a link in the description to my Patreon where you can subscribe for £3 a month and get access to our server, including the early testing of the mods we're building. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of my existing patrons for their support and for being part of my absolutely fantastic community. Seriously, they are funding what you've seen in this video, and it's just awesome that we're able to do something like this. Thanks folks, and I'll see you all in the next one.